Okay, we're back. I had to chug some water real quick. So video two of the Physicality of Sherlock Holmes miniseries within Don't Make Me Pull Out My Books, episode 7. So this is Don't Make Me Pull Out My Books, episode 7, the Physicality of Sherlock Holmes, part 2, which we're calling, I don't know what we're calling it yet. It'll get a fancy title in the YouTube thing. But in my notes, I call it Sudden Bursts. We're just going to get right into it. You should have already, if you're going to watch this one, it would be best to start with the video entitled, Oh My God, What the Fuck, Holmes? Because that will give you an idea of what we're exploring here, which is the physicality of Sherlock Holmes and its relation to Elementary's Holmes. One of the things that Elementary's Holmes does so well, I mean, he does a lot of things well, let's be real here. One of the things he does especially well is that calm before the storm, that moment where there's stillness followed by an eruption of energy, because that's very canon. That's something we see a lot in the stories, such as in Copper Beeches. As to Holmes, I observed that he sat frequently for half an hour on end, with knitted brows and an abstracted air, but he swept the matter away with a wave of his hand when I mentioned it. Data, 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 he cried impatiently. I can't make bricks without clay. And yet he would always wind up by muttering that no sister of his should have ever accepted such a position. So he's, sitting calmly when asked, "Oh, eruption!" In my larger stack of notes, we're looking for the yellow ones. In Norwood Builder. It was late when my friend returned, and I could see, by a glance at his haggard and anxious face, that the high hopes with which he had started had not been fulfilled. For an hour he droned away upon his violin, endeavoring to soothe his own ruffled spirits. At last he flung down the instrument and plunged into a detailed account of his misadventures. So again, we're seeing a Holmes who's sitting quietly, doing nothing, and then suddenly just bursts out with action. In Charles Augustus Milverton, Holmes sat motionless by the fire, his hands buried deep in his trouser pockets, his chin sunk upon his breast, his eyes fixed upon the glowing embers. For half an hour he was silent and still. Then, with the gesture of a man who has taken his decision, he sprang to his feet and passed into his bedroom. He seems to like to chill out for about a half an hour. He's got about a half an hour worth of stillness in him before he's got to erupt. In The Resident Patient, Sherlock Holmes had listened to this long narrative with an intentness which showed me that his interest was keenly aroused. His face was as impassive as ever, but his lids had drooped more heavily over his eyes, and his smoke had curled up more thickly from his pipe to emphasize each curious episode in the doctor's tale. As our visitor concluded, Holmes sprang up without a word, handed me my hat, picked up his own from the table, and followed Dr. Trevelyan to the door. And it's cool too, because he'll often do this with no forewarning. He just explodes. Suddenly he's everywhere. Suddenly he's moving again, and you're like, I thought we were chilling. I thought we were hanging out. Why are you moving? Naval Treaty. This tale of our clients appeared to have an extraordinary effect upon Sherlock Holmes. He rose from his chair and paced about the room in uncontrollable excitement. An instance of him listening quietly, and then not listening quietly any longer. Stockbroker's clerk. It's kind of a mixed example, because he was engaged in activity before this. He wasn't just sitting in his chair smoking, or, staring at the wall or listening to a client. Again and much louder came the rat-tat-tat. We all gazed expectantly at the closed door. Glancing at Holmes, I saw his face turn rigid, and he leaned forward in intense excitement. Then suddenly came a low, guggling, gargling sound, and a brisk drumming upon woodwork. Holmes sprang frantically across the room and pushed at the door. It was fastened on the inner side. Following his example, we threw ourselves upon it with all our weight. Cardboard Box shows us another instance of this. He had been talking in a high, quick voice, staring blankly up over the garden fence, but now he sprang briskly to his feet and walked towards the house. In Bruce Partington's plan, he sat lost in thought, tapping his fingers on the table. Finally, he sprang to his feet. He does a lot of springing. He does a lot of springing to his feet. There's nothing like reading lists of examples from an author's work to find phrases that they like to use a lot. And there's nothing wrong with that because in this case they're short stories, so they're spaced out over time. They were periodicals, so you weren't reading them like this. But it is something that Holmes does consistently, as the author tells us, that Holmes will move when he needs to. Holmes sat, from Bruce Partington Plans again? Well, from Bruce Partington Plans. Holmes sat silent and composed, his eyelids half shut, but every sense on alert. He raised his head with a sudden jerk. From Devil's Foot. He sat coiled in his armchair, his haggard and ascetic face hardly visible amid the blue swirl of his tobacco smoke, his black brows drawn down, his forehead contracted, his eyes vacant and far away. Finally, he laid down his pipe and sprang to his feet. "It won't do, Watson," said he with a laugh. "Let us walk along the cliffs together and search for flint arrows. We are more likely to find them than clues to this problem. To let the brain work without sufficient material is like racing an engine. It racks itself to pieces. The sea air, sunshine, and patience, Watson. All else will come." So there's like a consistent pattern here in when he sits quiet and when he starts moving again. The sitting quiet times are the times when he's just thinking about a problem. But Holmes is unique, and what makes him different from his brother Mycroft is that he doesn't just sit and think about a problem. He acts on it, and he doesn't just act on it. He acts abruptly, and I'm using this word just to describe an action. Violently. He acts violently, not like raw violently, but like a sudden burst. That's why I call it sudden burst in all my notes. He moves very quickly and with direction and purpose when he does move. From Sussex Vampire. Holmes rose, with that quick curiosity which sprang from his eager mind, and examined them with some care. He returned with his eyes full of thought. Oh, this is great. I love this. Torbridge. Whichever. His eyes fixed, and he repeated in broken words, "On the floor of her wardrobe." Then he sank into silence, and I saw that some train of thought had been set moving which would be foolish to interrupt. Suddenly, with a start, he emerged into brisk life once more. Also from Torbridge. He seated himself upon the stone ledge of the bridge, and I could see his quick gray eyes darting their questioning glances in every direction. Suddenly he sprang up again and ran across to the opposite parapet, whipped his lens from his pocket, and began to examine the stonework. And then later on in Torbridge. Holmes did not answer. His pale, eager face had suddenly assumed that tense, far-away expression which I had learned to associate with the supreme manifestations of his genius. So evident was the crisis in his mind that none of us dared to speak, and we sat, barrister, prisoner, and myself, watching him in a concentrated and absorbed silence. Suddenly he sprang from his chair, vibrating with nervous energy and the pressing need for action. I love it! Creeping man. With a wave of his hand, he indicated my old armchair, but otherwise for half an hour, he gave no sign that he was aware of my presence. Then with a start, he seemed to come from his reverie, and with his usual whimsical smile, he greeted me back to what had once been my home. From Veiled Lodger. Oh, and this has a bonus. This is a bonus general elementary reference with a very specific elementary reference. Or rather, elementary reference is canon, not the other way around. Our visitor had no sooner waddled out of the room, no other verb can describe Mrs. Marlowe's method of progression, than Sherlock Holmes threw himself with fierce energy upon the pile of commonplace books in the corner. For a few minutes there was a constant swish of the leaves, and then with a grunt of satisfaction he came upon what he sought. So excited was he that he did not rise, but sat upon the floor like some strange Buddha, with crossed legs, the huge books all around him, and one open upon his knee. So in episode 3, Child Predator? Yeah, I think it's called episode 3, where Joan walks in and he's sitting on the floor surrounded by all these files and he's not wearing a shirt. Canon. Okay, well the shirt off is not exactly canon, but it was nice. So that's what I have for these notes. Elementary's Holmes does the silent for half an hour thing a little bit less than perhaps the whole weird actions and some of the other things that I'll be exploring in my other videos. But he still does it on a fairly regular basis, often enough that it can be commented upon in this. So that's another look at the physicality of Sherlock Holmes and Elementary's excellent interpretation of Holmes. It kept the fact that Holmes wasn't very good at sitting still, except for the occasions when he was melancholy and depressed and not engaged on something. But when he was working, Holmes was not very good at sitting still. JLM's Holmes captures that quite well. And look at that. This video is less than 11 minutes. See you in the third video.